Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are looking at the ultimate question. Does the human soul survive death? But we aren't looking at scripture or tradition. We are looking at the first serious attempt to prove the existence of the soul and the reality of a spiritual world using science, hard data, and psychological experiment. We're talking about F.W.H. Myers and his massive work on human personality, where he argues that telepathy, ghosts, and trance states aren't superstitions, but biological facts that prove we are citizens of a larger universe.
It is a massive claim, isn't it? I mean, to even attempt something like that. But what makes this so compelling is the man behind it and the time he was living in.
Absolutely. We're diving into human personality and its survival of bodily death.
A book published after he died in 1903, and it's really a monument to a specific moment in history.
Right, and we have to set the scene here because the context is just everything. You can't understand Myers without understanding the late Victorian world.
It was a time of, you could say, intellectual whiplash, a real crisis of meaning.
How so?
Well, on one hand, you have science just rocketing forward. I mean, think about it. We're mapping the stars, we're dissecting animals, understanding biology, geology, the tides.
We're building engines, lighting up cities with electricity. The physical world feels like it's finally being conquered, that it's becoming knowable.
Exactly. Knowable. But at the same time, something else is.
Yeah.
Well, it's dying. The old religious certainty, the foundation of Western culture for centuries, is crumbling.
Darwin.
Darwin is the earthquake. Origin of Species comes out a few decades before, and it just shakes the church to its very foundations.
Suddenly humanity isn't the special creation of God. We're just another branch on the evolutionary tree.
And that creates this huge tension, this gap. You get two main camps forming. On one side, you have what Myers would call the blind faith of the past. People believing because they were told to believe because of tradition.
And on the other side,
the new scientific orthodoxy. A kind of a resolute agnosticism.
Right. There was that Latin phrase they used to use, wasn't there? The intellectual slogan of the day.
Irema sed ignorabimus.
We do not know and we shall not know.
Exactly. It was a door slamming shut.
Yeah.
The scientific community had basically decided, look, questions about the soul, God, the afterlife, they're outside the lab. We can't test them, so we can't know them. End of discussion.
Which is so strange when you think about it. As Myers points out, we had applied this incredible scientific method to everything. We'd weighed the moon, we'd measured the distance to the sun.
But not to ourselves, not to the most fundamental question of all. Do we survive? Is there more to us than just this biological machine?
And that's the gap he steps into. That's his mission.
He looks at that wall between science and religion and says, I'm going to knock it down. And he decides to do it using the enemy's own weapons. He wants to use what he calls the uniformitarian hypothesis.
Okay, that sounds very academic. Break that down for us. What does uniformitarian hypothesis actually mean?
It's actually a beautifully simple idea. He basically says if a spiritual world exists, it's not some separate magical realm that breaks all the rules. It's part of nature.
So it follows laws.
It follows laws. And if it follows laws, we should be able to observe it. We should be able to run experiments. We should be able to discover it now, right here, just like we discover a new chemical element or a new species of beetle.
So no more relying on a story from 2,000 years ago. He wants to find evidence in the present day.
Precisely. He was a leading figure in the Society for Psychical Research. And you have to understand, these weren't a bunch of cooks in tinfoil hats.
No, these were top-tier academics. Cambridge scholars, physicists, philosophers.
People with a lot to lose, reputationally. And Myers' book is the result of decades of their data collection. But to even start analyzing that data, he realized he had to come up with a whole new model of what a human being actually is.
Because the old ghost in the machine idea wasn't going to cut it.
Not for the kind of psychology they were developing. Which brings us to his central metaphor, and honestly, it's one of the most powerful ideas in the whole book. He calls it the spectrum of consciousness.
I do love a good metaphor. How does the spectrum work?
Well, think about the spectrum of light you learned about in school. You've got the colors we can see with our eyes, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet.
The rainbow. Visible light.
Visible light. But we know scientifically that visible light is just a tiny, tiny fraction of the total electromagnetic spectrum.
Right. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. You've got infrared on one side, beyond the red.
Heat waves.
And ultraviolet on the other side, beyond the violet.
Yeah.
X-rays, gamma rays.
Exactly. Now, Myers says our everyday consciousness, the part of you listening to this right now, the part that worries about bills and decides what to have for lunch, that's just the visible part of our mental spectrum. He calls it the supraliminal self.
Supra, above, Lyman, threshold. The part of us above the threshold of awareness.
Our waking self. And he argues this waking self is just a tiny slice of who we are. It's a specialized tool that evolution has developed for a very specific purpose.
To deal with the physical world.
To hunt, to gather, to avoid predators, to reproduce, to survive on this planet. It's our front-end user interface.
So the me that I think of as me is just the tip of the iceberg.
A very small tip. Because beneath that threshold, you have the subliminal self. And we have to be really careful with this term.
Because today, when we hear subconscious, we immediately think of Freud.
We think of the Freudian basement, this dark, messy place full of repressed desires, childhood trauma, all the stuff we don't want to look at.
The kind of mental trash can.
Right. But Myers is writing before Freud becomes dominant, and his vision is radically different. He says, yes, there might be a basement, and some of it might be junk, but it's not just a trash can. It's a gold mine. He calls it submerged mentation. And like the light spectrum, it extends in two directions.
Okay, let's map this out. What's on the red end of this mental spectrum, the infrared part?
The red end is the organic side. This is the lower end of the subliminal, the part that connects down into the body. It runs the machine.
My vital functions.
Your heartbeat, your digestion, the way your cells repair themselves, how your body regulates its temperature, all the incredibly complex stuff that happens without you having to think about it.
Right. I don't have to consciously tell my liver what to do. My subliminal self handles that. It's the body's autopilot.
Exactly. But then, what about the other end? The violet end.
The ultraviolet of the soul.
This is where it gets really groundbreaking.
Yes.
This is the higher end of the spectrum. Just as ultraviolet light has a higher frequency, a higher energy than visible light, this part of the subliminal self has faculties that are, well, they're beyond our normal waking abilities. This is where Myers places telepathy, perception at a distance, what he calls telesthesia, and, crucially, genius.
Okay, hold on. Genius. We usually think of a genius as just someone who's incredibly smart, a high IQ, someone who studies a lot. But Myers is framing it as a biological phenomenon, something to do with this hidden self.
He is. For him, genius isn't just about raw processing power in the conscious mind. He defines it very specifically. He calls it a subliminal uprush.
A subliminal uprush. I like that phrase. It's very visual, like a geyser.
That's a perfect image for it. Think of it this way. For most of us, there's a thick wall, a threshold, between our waking self and this vast subliminal mind. We solve problems by consciously grinding away at them with logic.
Step by step.
But for the genius, that wall is permeable. It's thin. And this deeper, wider part of the self, which has access to more information and different ways of thinking, can suddenly surge up and flood the conscious mind with an answer.
So when a poet gets a flash of inspiration or a scientist suddenly sees the solution to a problem in a dream, that's the uprush.
That's the uprush. It feels like it comes from outside you because it's coming from a part of yourself that isn't the normal I you identify with.
It gives some amazing examples of this. Robert Louis Stevenson is one of the big ones.
Oh, the brownies.
Yeah.
It's one of the most bizarre and fascinating stories in literary history.
So Stevenson, the author of Treasure Island, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde, he claimed he didn't actually write his stories.
He was very open about it. He said he had little people, or brownies, living in his head. And while he slept, they would do the work for him. They would compose his stories in his dreams.
That sounds like madness. I mean, if someone said that today, you'd think they were having a psychotic break. The elves wrote my novel.
It does sound that way, until you look at what was happening. Stevenson said he literally trained his subliminal self to be a commercial fiction writer. He'd tell his brownies that he was short on cash, and they needed to come up with a profitable story.
And they did.
He said the entire plot of Jekyll and Hyde came to him in a dream. He said the brownies would act out the stories for him, like a play, while he slept. And he would just wake up and write down what he had seen.
So he was basically outsourcing his creative process to his own subconscious.
And giving them full credit. He said, I am the one who holds the pen, but they are the ones who do the work. For Myers, this is Exhibit A. Inspiration is not some magical muse descending from the heavens. It's the subliminal self handing a finished product up to the conscious mind.
He goes back even further to Socrates.
Socrates is the classic case of the daemon, his inner voice.
Right. Socrates claimed he had this voice, this demon, that would guide him.
And interestingly, it never told him what to do. It only ever told him what not to do. It was a purely cautionary voice. Don't go down that street. Don't engage with that person. It was a premonition of danger.
And Myers doesn't write this off as schizophrenia or some kind of auditory hallucination.
No, he sees it as a subliminal uprush of a profound moral genius. The wiser, deeper part of Socrates was protecting the conscious part. And then you have perhaps the most powerful example, Joan of Arc.
Yeah, in any modern psychological textbook, Joan of Arc is usually diagnosed with some kind of disorder, hearing voices, having visions.
Myers just flatly rejects that. He says, look at the evidence. Here is an illiterate peasant girl. She leads armies. She outthinks seasoned generals. She crowns a king. She stands up to an army of the best theological minds in Europe during her trial and ties them in knots.
It's a fair point. Usually, serious mental illness makes you less functional, not a military and political prodigy.
Exactly. Myers asks, is this the behavior of a degenerate, of a broken mind? Or is this the sign of a mind that is tapping into a much wider spectrum of reality than anyone else? He calls her visions a subliminal uprush of sanctity, a kind of moral genius.
So he's reframing all of this. Inspiration, genius, prophecy, sanctity. They're not aberrations. They're not sicknesses. They are, glimpses of our future.
That's the optimistic core of his whole theory. He believes these supernormal faculties, this violet end of the spectrum, are not supernatural. They are the evolutionary norm of the future.
So we're all meant to be telepathic geniuses eventually.
That's the idea. We're like tadpoles just beginning to sprout legs. The genius is just a tadpole whose legs have grown in a bit early. These uprushes are hints of the next stage of human development.
That's a much more hopeful way of looking at it. We're not broken, we're just unfinished.
We're seedlings. And that brings us to the next logical question. If this powerful subliminal self exists, how do we get in touch with it? How do we access it? And to answer that, Myers forces us to completely re-examine two things we think we understand: sleep and hypnotism.
Let's start with sleep, because I think, like most people, I just see it as downtime. You turn the machine off, recharge the battery, and get back to it in the morning.
Myers sees that as a very superficial view. He asks a very simple but profound question. If sleep is just about physical rest, why do we need to lose consciousness? Why can't we just lie still on a sofa for 8 hours? Why does the I have to go away?
And what's his answer?
His answer is radical. He calls sleep the soul's protoplasmic task.
Protoplasmic task. Okay, another great Myers phrase. What does that mean?
He starts with a core assertion. The soul is not a function of the body. The body is a mechanism controlled by the soul. But, he says, controlling this physical machine, operating it in this dense three-dimensional world is. It's exhausting. It's drudgery for the spirit.
So when we sleep, the soul gets a break from driving the car.
It gets to go home for a while. Myers argues that in sleep, the subliminal self is liberated from its duty of managing the body. It withdraws to its native element, the spiritual world, and it recharges.
So it's not just physical rest, it's spiritual refueling.
That's why deep sleep heals us in a way that just lying down with your eyes open can't. We're dipping back into the source. We're drawing in what he calls metatherial energy to sustain the whole organism.
Which connects directly to his work on hypnotism, right? Because hypnotism is like an artificially induced sleep state.
Exactly. He saw hypnotism not as a stage trick, but as a key. It was an experimental method for reaching the subliminal self while the subject was still awake enough to report back.
And he wasn't just talking about making people cluck like a chicken. He was looking at profound physical effects.
Absolutely profound. He documents cases where deep hypnosis could induce total anesthesia. You could perform surgery on a patient with no ether, no chloroform, and they would feel no pain.
Just based on suggestion.
Just based on suggestion. But the even more startling cases are what he called stigmatization.
This is the stuff that sounds like it's straight out of a horror movie.
It's mind-bending. A hypnotist would tell a subject, I am going to touch your arm with a red-hot poker. But instead, he just touched them with his finger or a pencil. And what would happen?
The skin would react.
A red mark would appear, a blister would form. The skin would literally create a burn where there was no heat, no physical cause.
So a thought, a suggestion planted in the subliminal self, could rearrange the physical cells of the body.
Think about what that implies. It completely demolishes the idea that mind is just a product of matter. Here, the mind is commanding matter. The soul is the driver, and the body is a very, very responsive vehicle.
And he took this into the moral realm as well. He talks about moral healing.
Yes, there's a fascinating case of a boy who was a kleptomaniac, a thief full of malice. And through hypnotic suggestion, they essentially reprogrammed his subliminal self.
They just told him to be good.
They suggested to his deeper self that stealing was wrong, that he felt compassion, that he wanted to be honest, and according to the case, it worked. The boy's character fundamentally changed.
So he's connecting this to things like faith healing, like the miracles at Lourdes.
He is, but he's very careful. He isn't saying it's a miracle in the sense that God is reaching down and breaking the laws of nature. He's saying the mechanism is the same. Whether you call on the Virgin Mary or Christian Science or just the power of your own will, what you are doing is a powerful form of self-suggestion. You are directing that meteorial energy through your subliminal self to heal the body.
He's trying to find the universal law behind the apparent miracle.
That was always his goal, to create a science of the spiritual, a vocabulary for the invisible world. And the absolute foundation of that science, the first law of his spiritual physics, is telepathy.
The linchpin of the whole argument.
He actually coined the word, telepathy. It didn't exist before Myers and his colleagues.
I did not know that. So what's his precise definition?
The communication of impressions of any kind from one mind to another, independent of the recognized channels of sense.
And why is this so critical? Why does the whole argument for survival hang on proving telepathy?
Because you have to go back to the materialist argument, the default scientific position.
Which is no brain, no mind. The brain produces consciousness like a generator produces electricity. When the generator breaks, the lights go out. End of story.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But if Myers can prove that one mind can communicate with another mind without using the brain's physical sensors, without sight, sound, or touch, then he's proven that the mind is not entirely dependent on the brain.
The signal doesn't need the physical wires.
The signal can travel without the wires. And if the mind can operate outside the brain's normal channels while we are alive, then it's logically possible that it can continue to exist after the brain is dead. Telepathy is the bridge from psychology to survival.
It's a huge leap, but I see the logic. So what's his evidence? He starts with phantasms of the living.
Right. This is where we get into what he calls veridical hallucinations.
Veridical meaning truth-telling, so not just a random hallucination.
No, it's a hallucination that corresponds to a real event. There's the famous arrival case of Colonel Reed.
Tell us that one.
So Colonel Reed is at home. He glances out his window, and clear as day, he sees his wife's carriage coming up the drive. He sees the specific horse, the coachman. He hears the sound of the gravel. It's completely real to him.
Okay.
He gets up, goes to the front door to greet her, and there's nothing there. The driveway is empty, no carriage, no horse, no tracks in the gravel, nothing. He's baffled, thinks he's going mad.
A classic ghost story setup.
But here's the twist. About 20 minutes later, the real carriage arrives, and it's identical in every detail to the one he saw in his vision.
So what's Myers' explanation? Not a premonition.
No, he says it's telepathy. The wife, 20 minutes down the road, was tired from her journey. She was thinking intensely, oh, I can't wait to be home, I'm almost there. She was projecting that thought, that image of her arrival.
And her husband's mind picked it up.
His subliminal self received the signal and projected into his consciousness as a full sensory hallucination. He saw her thought.
Myers has a term for this tendency, doesn't he? Another one of his technical phrases.
He does. Psychoragic diathesis.
Break that down.
It literally means a soul breaking loose tendency. He believed that some people are constitutionally more likely to have their spirit, their energy self, detach and become perceptible to others, especially during moments of intense emotion or crisis.
So some people are just natural broadcasters. Their phantom can appear to others even while they're alive.
Exactly. And the SPR collected hundreds of these cases. People at the point of death in an accident suddenly appearing to their mother thousands of miles away. This is crucial because it sets up the next logical step.
If a living person can project a ghost of themselves through telepathy, what happens when they die?
The conversation moves from phantasms of the living to phantasms of the dead. And Myers' argument is one of continuity. He says there's no sharp break. If a mind can project an image 5 minutes before death, why is it so impossible to believe it could project one 5 minutes after death? The mechanism is the same.
And to counter the argument that these are just grief-induced hallucinations, he brings up a very specific category of evidence, the peak in Darien cases.
This is some of the most compelling evidence in the entire book. The name comes from a Keats poem about the explorer Balboa seeing the Pacific Ocean for the first time. It's about seeing a new, unexpected reality.
So what happens in these cases?
Well, you have a person on their deathbed. It's common for them to claim they see spirits of deceased relatives waiting for them. Oh, there's mother, or my husband is here for me.
Which a skeptic would just dismiss. Oxygen deprivation to the brain, wishful thinking, the mind comforting itself as it shuts down.
Right. But here's the catch in a Picandarian case. The dying person sees the spirit of someone they believe to be still alive.
That's...
Imagine this scenario, which is based on a real case. A dying woman is surrounded by her family. Her younger sister lives in another country. Unbeknownst to the dying woman, her sister died unexpectedly 3 days ago. The family has kept the news from her to avoid causing her distress.
Okay.
Suddenly, the dying woman's eyes open wide. She looks at the corner of the room with an expression of complete shock and joy and says, "Oh, it's Mary. Mary is here. But why didn't you tell me she was coming?" And then she passes away.
She couldn't have hallucinated that out of expectation. Her brain had every reason to believe Mary was alive and well thousands of miles away.
Precisely. It short-circuits the wishful thinking argument. It suggests she is genuinely perceiving a reality and receiving information, that Mary is in the spirit world, that she could not have known through any normal means.
He also mentions a statistical study, a census of hallucinations.
Yes, a massive undertaking. They interviewed over 17,000 people, and the statistical correlation they found between the time of a person's death and a loved one seeing their apparition was hundreds of times greater than chance could account for.
So we've built a pretty strong circumstantial case. We've gone from living telepathy to crisis apparitions to post-mortem apparitions. But Myers isn't satisfied. He wants direct proof. He wants to talk to the dead.
And that takes us to Section 4. Possession and communications. This is where, for many people, the whole thing goes off the rails. But for Myers, this is the final, conclusive proof.
We have to start with motor automatism. It sounds so mechanical.
It is. Think back to the model of the body as a machine, a violin or a typewriter. Normally, you, the conscious self, are the one playing the violin. But, he says, sometimes you can step aside, let your mind go blank, and another part of you, your subliminal self, can pick up the bow and start playing.
That's automatic writing, where you hold a pen and your hand writes messages without your conscious control.
Exactly. Or table tilting, or using a planchette. But here comes the giant leap of logic. If your own subliminal self can use your hand to write, why can't an external intelligence? If the violin is sitting there unattended, can't someone else walk in and play a tune?
A discarnate spirit.
A discarnate spirit. And this is where he brings in his star witnesses. The first is W. Staten Moses.
Now, this guy is a real problem for skeptics.
A huge problem. Because he wasn't some uneducated, easily suggestible person. This was a highly respected, university-educated Anglican clergyman. A master at University College School in London. He had everything to lose and nothing to gain by getting involved in this.
And what happened with him?
Over years, in private, he produced volumes and volumes of automatic writing. These writings claimed to be from a band of spirits led by one called Imperator, who were there to teach him a new, more evolved spiritual philosophy.
What's so compelling about that? A skeptic would just say it was his own subconscious.
But the content argued against Moses' own deeply held beliefs. He was an Orthodox Christian. These spirits were constantly correcting his theology, arguing with him, teaching him things that he found difficult to accept. His own hand would write a furious no in response to one of his own conscious questions.
That is strange. You'd expect your own subconscious to be, on your side.
Exactly. And it wasn't just writing. He experienced intense physical phenomena, levitation of heavy tables, musical instruments playing on their own, sense of perfume filling a sealed room. Myers studied the case exhaustively and concluded that while some of it might be Moses' own subliminal self, the sheer volume of specific factual information that Moses couldn't have known, it pointed to external intelligences.
And then there's the big one, Mrs. Piper.
The White Crow. That's what the great Harvard psychologist William James called her.
Why a white crow?
James famously said, to upset the conclusion that all crows are black, one has no need to seek demonstration that no crows are black. It is sufficient to produce one white crow. For him, after years of rigorous testing, Mrs. Piper was that one white crow that shattered his skepticism.
Tell us about the George Pelham case, because this seems to be the one that convinced so many of the researchers.
George Pelham, that's a pseudonym for a man named George Pellow, was a young lawyer and author. He was part of their social circle, and he was a complete skeptic about all this. He died suddenly in a riding accident.
Okay.
A short time later, during a trance session with Mrs. Piper, a personality emerged claiming to be GP, George Pelham. And this wasn't some vague, I am the light kind of spirit. This was him.
How could they be so sure?
Over the course of about 150 sittings with various people, this GP intelligence correctly identified 30 of his old friends, calling them by name, recalling shared private memories, using his personal slang and mannerisms. He discussed the private details of his estate with his executor. For all intents and purposes, the man they were talking to was George Pelham.
But it wasn't perfect, was it? Myers is very honest about the difficulties. The communications were often confused, trivial, or just plain wrong.
And this is a brilliant and crucial part of Myers' analysis. A skeptic would seize on the mistakes and say, see, it's all nonsense. But Myers says, no, the confusion is actually evidence for its genuineness. He uses the aphasia analogy.
Aphasia is a brain injury, right? Where you struggle to find the right words.
Exactly. Imagine a spirit from another dimension trying to operate a human medium's brain. It's like an expert pilot trying to fly a broken, unfamiliar airplane in a storm. Or like trying to speak through someone who's having a stroke. Of course it's going to be difficult. They are, as the spirits themselves claimed, asleep to their world in order to be awake in ours.
So the typos and the stutters aren't a sign of fraud. They're a sign of a difficult, long-distance call.
That's the argument. The process is messy and difficult, and that leads to the highest form of communication he identifies. We've talked about messages coming down from them to us, but what about the soul going up?
Ecstasy.
This is where we leave the seance room and enter the world of the mystics. Plotinus, Swedenborg. Myers argues that in a state of ecstasy, the soul isn't just receiving a message. It temporarily detaches from the body and travels. It makes a direct visit to the spiritual world.
The flight of the one to the one.
A direct experience of that wider reality. And for Myers, all this evidence, from a tiny telepathic impression all the way up to mystical ecstasy, it all points in one direction. It forces a complete revolution in how we think about the biggest questions.
Which brings us to the real heart of the matter, the religious synthesis. Because this isn't just about proving ghosts exist, it's about what that proof means for God, for atheism, for the purpose of life.
It changes everything. He believes that if you accept the evidence, you are forced into a new religious synthesis. And the first casualty of this new synthesis is materialism.
He argues that the proof of telepathy single-handedly destroys materialism. That's a bold claim.
It is, but follow his logic. What is the core tenet of materialism?
The brain creates consciousness.
The brain generates consciousness, but if Myers has proven that consciousness can operate outside the brain's physical channels, through telepathy, through an apparition appearing miles away, through ecstasy, then the brain cannot be the generator.
It must be a receiver, a transmitter.
Exactly. The brain is a biological radio. It picks up the signal of consciousness, but the signal itself exists independently. And if this signal doesn't depend on the radio, then smashing the radio doesn't destroy the signal. Materialism, he argues, is dead.
Okay, so if materialism is gone, do we just go back to the traditional God, the old man with a beard on a throne?
Not at all. Myers is very clear about this. He finds that idea just as limiting. The evidence doesn't point to an anthropomorphic king. It points to something much vaster. He calls it the world soul.
A world soul. That sounds almost Eastern or pantheistic.
And it has elements of that. He conceives of a supreme power that is infinite energy, but also infinite love.
Love. That feels like a sudsy jump from science to sentimentality.
But he argues it isn't. He argues that love is a physical law of the spiritual universe, just as gravity is a law of the physical universe.
How does he make that connection?
He calls love the inward aspect of the telepathic law. Telepathy proves that souls can connect, that they can interpenetrate. Love is the force that drives that connection. It is the energy of integration, of unity. Hate, by contrast, is the energy of isolation and disintegration. To love is to become more unified with the world soul.
That's a powerful idea. Love as the spiritual equivalent of gravity.
It is. And it has huge implications for how we view evil and suffering. He directly addresses the pessimist, the person who looks at the world's pain and concludes that life is a cruel joke, a cosmic blunder.
And what's his answer to the pessimist?
His answer is evolution. Always evolution. If his evidence is true, if we survive death and continue to learn and grow, then the universe cannot be a blunder. It is a system designed for endless evolution.
So what is evil then, if the universe is fundamentally good?
Evil, for Myers, is not some mighty cosmic power, not a devil who is God's opposite. He says evil is a slavish thing. It is simply a lack of development. It's ignorance. It's a state of isolation, a spiritual madness where a soul cuts itself off from the universal telepathic bond of love.
It's a cancer cell that thinks it's the whole body.
A perfect analogy. And eventually, that cell has to learn, or it perishes in its own isolation. This completely reframes the idea of heaven and hell. Myers rejects what he calls the pre-Copernican idea of an instant, one-time judgment.
So you don't die and immediately get sent to the fiery pit or the pearly gates.
No. You just keep going. It's a doctrine of progression. Death is just moving from one classroom to the next. The spirits communicating through Moses and others all describe this. Spheres of existence, worlds of learning, where we continue to evolve to shed our selfishness, to move towards greater love and wisdom.
Where does this leave traditional religion then? What about Christianity?
Myers was raised Christian, and he doesn't reject it. He reinterprets it. He sees the resurrection of Christ not as a one-off rule-breaking miracle, but as the supreme demonstration of the very laws he's been uncovering.
A demonstration that the human spirit survives bodily death and can manifest again.
Precisely. And he makes an incredibly bold prediction. He says that in a century's time, people won't believe in the resurrection in spite of science. They will believe in it because of psychical research. Science will finally validate the core event of the faith.
He also looks to the East, to Buddhism.
He finds a lot of common ground there. The cosmic scope of Buddhism, the idea of reincarnation as lives of heightening wisdom, it all fits his data remarkably well. The one place he differs is the ultimate goal. He rejects the Buddhist idea of nirvana as a kind of extinction or nothingness. Myers is all about more life, endless personality, endless growth.
So it's a true synthesis. It takes from science, Christianity, Eastern thought, and weaves it all together based on his experimental evidence.
It's his provisional synthesis, as he humbly called it. Which brings us to the final vision, the big picture.
The outro. What's the final takeaway from this monumental work?
Myers leaves us with a picture of the universe that is not a cold, dead machine, but a living, evolving process. A process moving from energy into life, from life into love, and from love into a joy we can barely conceive of.
We are all force centers, he says, vibrating and interacting with each other.
We are not isolated specks of dust. We're part of a vast, interconnected spiritual cosmos. And death is not the end of the road. It's just a doorway, a veil. And he believed that veil was growing thinner.
And he leaves us with a challenge, doesn't he? A final provocative thought.
It's a beautiful and humbling image. He compares our current state of awareness to that of a starving child.
A starving child who can't imagine anything better than a dry crust of bread.
We are so focused on our little physical lives, our careers, our possessions, our fleeting pains and pleasures, we can't even begin to imagine the spiritual banquet that awaits us. Myers believed that his research and the work of the SPR had opened a tiny chink in the planetary cage. For the first time, a little bit of light from the wider universe was shining through.
And the ultimate question is, what do we do with that light? Do we try to widen the crack? Do we dare to look through? Or do we close our eyes, turn away, and pretend we're still alone in the dark?
Myers spent his life trying to pry that chink open just a little wider, believing that if we follow the evidence, wherever it leads, we will discover that we are citizens of a universe more magnificent and more hopeful than we ever dared to dream.
A universe of endless growth, endless connection, and endless love. I think that's a thought worth pondering.
Indeed it is.
This has been Thinking Deeper by 6-7.